Amazing. Well, good morning, Glasgow. Good morning. I'm Stella Campbell, and I'm joined by Paul Trainer here from the Glasgowist for a very special impromptu breaking news bulletin style episode of Food Chat
Yes.
today. We'll
This
keep
is
it.
at home with the Glasgow Food Chat, basically. We've
Yeah,
we've finally
exactly.
had enough time to have our tea and toast this morning before breaking news draws us to the internet.
Yeah, but duty calls, and when there's news this big, it has to be reported. So we are here today, obviously, to discuss the Michelin stars in Glasgow and the news that Unalome by Graham Cheevers in the West End has been awarded a star, and the fantastic Calbury has retained their star, which is fantastic news for Glasgow as a whole, for the food scene, and we're really excited to be chatting about it today. So, Paul, I think if you're going to tell us a wee bit more about what exactly it means to be awarded a star.
Well, I suppose it's just useful to have background because it was over 2 decades before we returned to the Michelin Guide last year with a star for Calbrook. So, in terms of what all the fuss is about, I suppose it's the one international standard that's really valued by chefs, and one of the reasons for that is because all the inspectors, the people who actually go around and make the decisions on this, are industry people. They're people who have a chefing background. So unfortunately, it's not a job that you or I can well, certainly not me, can apply for there. But yeah, it's seen as a mark of distinction, not just for the restaurant, but for the city itself, and the fact that Glasgow now enters into 2022 after a period when hospitality's been on pause with not one but two one-star Michelin restaurants is a good thing. And just even on a technical point of view, like see in terms of the way that I've spoken to people before in terms of recruiting talent into Glasgow, and they've said that often because Edinburgh does have more Michelin star restaurants, finding chefs of a certain caliber would be more likely to end up in Edinburgh than in Glasgow, despite the fact it's clearly obvious you'd have a much better time and standard of life living in Glasgow than you would in Edinburgh.
Yeah, I think I could argue that too.
I
I would
feel
say.
like I'm going to go off on a tangent, Sarah. So let's
I
just.
feel like that was really full of venom there. So just to scoot back to the happy news today, Paul, without your personal opinions about the sort of
I just think the best thing about Edinburgh is the road to Glasgow. That's all.
a fair point, well made. But Unalom, let's talk about it because it is a very new restaurant, actually, a kind of by standards of Glasgow, which is really exciting. Graham Peevers, obviously very talented chef, kind of returning home. Had some stars in his past work, I believe, or worked at places with stars. So kind of bringing it home to Glasgow, which is pretty exciting.
This isn't the first time he's opened a place that has won a star within the first year, or at least has taken over. But the difference here is it's the first restaurant that's really got his name above the door. So he chose to move back to Glasgow. I was speaking to him yesterday, and he said that one of the reasons he wanted to be in this city and wanted to aim for a star here is because he saw everything else that was going on and really values places nearby, like Calbrook and the Gannet, that are doing things at a really high standard. So it just seems interesting to build on previous conversations we've had that there's people that are being drawn to Glasgow and see it as somewhere that you can do interesting things. And that is being confirmed by the fact that we now have these two distinctions, and it's a huge credit to Calbrook that not only did they earn a star straight off the bat when they brought Lorna McNee from Glen Eagles, from Andrew Fairley's restaurant, Andrew Farley's restaurant, but they've retained it during very difficult circumstances. When you look at the list, the Michelin list for this year in Scotland, there's places that were on the list last year that still haven't really fully opened. So the fact that we're back and motoring forward, it's a good thing for the city.
Oh, no, definitely, I'd agree. And we've got a wee banner here asking if either of us have ever visited either of the Michelin star restaurants. And just to jump in quickly, because it's kind of a non-answer from me, is no, I haven't, unfortunately. Unalom's kind of just opened, so again, getting a place. And Calbrew, I mean, I'd be lucky to get a seat. I'd need to plan in advance. But what about you, Paul? Have you been before?
Well, I've been to Ulalome a couple of times, and I'm going again next week. I managed to book in before the rush. Calbrook, I haven't been. I've been in since Lorna's been there, but I haven't been in recently because they've been releasing their seats and tracks, and it just gets booked out, which is a great thing that they have really been able to up their standard of service and their standard of food, and they found a receptive audience for that. I should mention that earlier on in the week, 2 restaurants were also got a distinction of the Bib Gourmand distinction, which basically for the Michelin Guide it means that they're recognised for having good food at great prices, and that's Kapow, which we've written about in the Glasgow Times a lot, and Celentino's, which went into Cathedral House Hotel, right beside the Necropolis, which features in the new Black Batgirl movie, which I noticed you got the fact that Michael Keaton has arrived in the city. Sarah, just to plug one of your articles from yesterday.
We did indeed. That was on the late shift last night. We saw pictures of Michael Keaton arriving in Glasgow, which is very exciting. And as you say, the Batgirl cast seem to be getting around the food scene very much in Glasgow.
Well, this is the thing, what great news for the cast of Batgirl, who have been pictured in most restaurants of distinction in the city. They now know that they have 2 Michelin star rated restaurants to choose from.
Yeah, I anticipate Brendan Fraser's arrival at very soon. But then on the topic of Kapow and Celentano's, because that makes me feel a bit less of a fraud, is I have been to both of them and absolutely loved it. I think they're fantastic. Yeah. But we were kind of saying as well, as much as the Michelin stars are really fantastic, it's really lovely to see these 2 get them. The Bib Gourmands are quite exciting because they are slightly more accessible, or kind of the day-to-day where they value places that are great quality for good value, which I think is a lovely thing, and kind of more people will get to go to them. So what do you think about that for the food scene in Glasgow? I mean, I think it's the ones that have been chosen are very, what's the word I'm looking for? But like they're a really good showcase for what Glasgow can do, kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, across the 4, it's... You're thinking about the fact that Calbrook won a star within 5 months of appointing Lorna, and that we've got Graham making a decision to move to Glasgow and open a restaurant at possibly the most difficult point of hospitality in the last decade.
Yeah.
Kapow has been open for 2 years, but they've probably traded for about 6 months of that 2 years.
Do you know
it's like a couple that have a great experience of opening and running restaurants in London, and have decided to come up, and they've put a restaurant in the East End beside Glasgow Cathedral, just up the road from Terrace Brewery, and they're straight in. So I think it shows that the people who are arriving here, but also here coming up with new ideas, that people are taking notice of that, and that's definitely something that we're hoping will continue into the rest of the year, Sarah, I think.
Oh, no, definitely. And I was just going to say a selfish side note there, talking about restrictions in Kapow. I remember going for the first time and being crestfallen, because the food is obviously fantastic. Yeah. They had a beautiful cocktail list, and it's such a beautiful setting. And it was when we weren't allowed to drink inside, and my wee heart broke. I was so sad. There we go.
See, in terms of the Bib Gourmand side of things, right? It's interesting to think about like how Glasgow views fine dining, because traditionally we're just we're looking for a good night out, we're looking for good value, and maybe the Michelin template didn't always kind of fit for what the idea of like a big night out in Glasgow would be. But actually, the interesting thing for us is that Michelin has responded to kind of moving trends, and it's not as stuffy, shall we say, in terms of what you would expect for a Michelin restaurant. So there is space. I mean, Unalome's formal, and it's a beautiful room, and it's classic service. but it is still the place that you can go for a nice long lunch. And Calbrook would be exactly the same. I mean, essentially, Calbrook is a neighbourhood restaurant in the West End that just does an astonishing set menu and has a really good light list.
Because see, that's the thing with Michelin stars. I think my only real understanding before kind of getting more into food and drink was from MasterChef, when it's awful serious and Michelle Roux and everyone comes in and they have to go to these fancy restaurants that are super stuffy. And as you say, I think it's actually a lot more accessible than people would think. And especially in Glasgow, where we've spoken before, where there's a really nice vibe for nowhere has these airs and graces where you would feel unwelcome, I don't think. Like Glasgow does welcoming really well, especially with their food.
Yeah.
We've mentioned as well the chip is regarded in the guide as well, which they're coming up for their big 50th birthday. That's quite an exciting one.
I mean, it's great to see places like that have gone through all the different iterations and it's still very much a landmark.
Yeah.
And you know, as much as it's great to see new places, I really value having these kind of fixed points on the hospitality scene. And it's more there's an element of it kind of, you know, like you know that no matter what happens in your life or where you end up, you can always go back and get an air of familiarity. I remember talking to, you know, like it's a sister restaurant to the Ubiquitous Chip, and when I was talking to them, they were saying about Stravaigin, you know, like there'll be people that from that area that have been away for like 10 years, and they'll come in and they'll take great comfort in the fact that there's still like a familiar looking curry on the restaurant menu. So stuff like that is great. For me, the kind of Cafe Gandolfi is the one that I always kind of look to. That's kind of my eternal list of good Glasgow spots. I think that we are seeing we're kind of going through this state of flux where obviously we're worried about how restaurants are going to be able to continue with rising electricity prices and the pressures of the pandemic and everything that's happened over the last 2 years. But at the same time, we are seeing an astonishing influx of new places that are really worth something and worth visiting. So it's good. And now we're even being internationally recognised, and we're up there with the best.
Yeah, and I like to think, even personally, I mean, obviously I do not work within the industry, but I'd like to think that the fact that there's 2 Michelin stars now, you know, Glasgow is being recognised, it must be quite a boost, because even the chefs and everyone that we've spoken to consistently state that it's a really, really exciting time for the Glasgow food scene, and they're all really inspired by each other. You know, we get them on and they can rattle off like 10 restaurants that keep them going on the day to day. So I just think personally, like, it's such a fantastic thing. It's so much bigger than the sum of its parts, its award. Even if you don't necessarily subscribe to the actual institution, it's like having something like this is really starting to put Glasgow on the map. And it's just, as you say, a sign of everything that we get on here to talk about. I just think it's fantastic.
And see, when you look at, I mean, Michelin only kind of dip in and dip out of Glasgow, so we're not really one of the cities that they give their full attention to. We're more on their radar now, but there's plenty of other places where you can get a fantastic fine dining experience that would be up there. You know, when you think about One Devonshire and Brian Mall and Peter at the Gannet and these places that just hit the heights quite steadily and get the response from us. I'm not sure. Do you know, like, I was just thinking about whether I would actually like to be a Michelin star inspector, because I think it's, as far as I'm aware, the rules are that you have to go. You can't take someone with you, so it's just you, and you have to do a set amount every month consistently. So imagine you're on like your 8th scallop starter of the month, and you're just like, no more. You're just dying to go to Block and get a big dirty burger and some chips, you know, but you have to go for another big performance.
No, totally, because they do have as well for
jobs, but you know,
they have their guide obviously, and they do have a little synopsis of each place they go to. And I almost feel like it's kind of weird. Like, I don't know if that makes sense, but sometimes I read it and it feels weird that they've been to somewhere I've been. Like, you feel of your Glasgow restaurants, you know, when they're describing them as like a bright and airy. I'm like, yeah, I know. It's a really weird thing to imagine this person sitting down and deciding such an important thing. But nah, I don't think I could do it. I don't have the heart for it.
But look, one of the reasons that we wanted to jump on this is like it's not often that during your tea and toast you do get really good food news of this scale. So it is worth us congratulating the two restaurants and just seeing it as a sign that like things are happening. It's all happening in the big city.
That is very true. And I guess we will keep it short and sweet today, as I say, for this breaking news bulletin brought to you by Food Chat. We will be back very soon with another full episode of our podcast, which would be great. We'll be advertising that soon. But for now, Glasgow, I guess that's it from us today. And once again, congratulations to everybody that was included in the Michelin Guide this year and for our 2 stars this year. Congrats to them.